Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to the third and final segment in Professor Jason's three-part series on pronouncing consonant letters in Spanish. Okay, in segment 1 we looked at the letter B and V through J. Segment 2 covered K through Q, and in this final segment we're going to look at single R, double R through Z, of course, okay? So make sure you see the first two segments, and also I recommend that you look at the lesson that I've uploaded on pronouncing vowels in Spanish. But here we go then with the final part on consonant letters in Spanish. All right, we're going to start with R and double R. Now it's helpful to consider the single R and the double R as two distinct letters in Spanish because they have different pronunciation rules and they appear in different contexts. But one important thing to emphasize is that the Spanish R or Rs never sound like the R in the English words run or car. If you think about in English, the R sound, when you pronounce run, car, it doesn't touch, your tongue doesn't touch or make contact with the rest of the mouth, or not very much. Okay, so that's what's different. Let's look at the double R in Spanish first. As a letter, double R only appears internally in the middle of words between vowels. And in those cases, it's pronounced as a trill or a multiple flapping of the tip of the tongue against the ridge behind the top teeth as air passes over the tongue. It's what people call rolling their R's, okay? And everyone can do it if you have a tongue and a ridge behind your front teeth, okay? So examples: perro, carro, ferrocarril. Perro, carro, ferrocarril, okay? The single R letter can appear at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of words. Now let's start with the beginning, because at the beginning of words it has the same pronunciation as the double R. In other words, that multiple trill, right? The rolled R sound. Rio, rancho, rubia. Rio, rancho, rubia. Okay, at the beginning. When the single R appears internally or at the end of words, the pronunciation is different, but never like the English R, as we pointed out. It actually sounds more like the double T in English words like better or letter, in which the tip of the tongue strikes the ridge behind the top teeth in a single flapping motion. So it sounds like pero, farol, comer. Pero, farol, comer. Okay. Moving on to the consonant S. In most dialects, the S sounds a lot like the S in the English word self or sun, regardless of its position in a word. So we have Susana, San Salvador, Casa, Los Osos. Okay? In Spain, it may sound different because some speakers raise the tip of the tongue up behind the top teeth. So casa becomes casa. Okay? Also, before certain consonants, such as M and D, the S can have more of a Z-like sound, like in the English pronunciation of Lisbon. Okay? Examples in Spanish: mismo and desde. So it's more of a Z sound. Mismo, desde. Okay? T. The T in Spanish varies slightly from the T in the English pronunciation of the name Tom, in that in Spanish the tongue is lowered and makes contact against the back of the upper teeth. As with the B and P sounds, the release of air is more subtle than in English. So instead of Tom, it's tamale. Tu, meter. Okay? Compare Tom in English, Tom, and tamale. It's much more controlled. Tu, meter. Okay? Moving on quickly to W. Like the letter K, the letter W is extremely rare in Spanish spelling, being restricted to imported or borrowed words. Although its pronunciation varies somewhat from region to region, you can safely pronounce it like the W in watch. Washington and kiwi. Kiwi. Kiwi is a good example because it has both K and W, which are both letters that aren't really native to Spanish spelling. Moving on to X. Surprisingly, X can be a little bit problematic. Okay? In most Spanish words, the letter X has a pronunciation similar to that of the X in the English word taxi or exit, something like a K and an S pronounced together. Some examples: máximo, examen, explicar, texto. However, some Spanish speakers pronounce the X more like an S when it comes before another consonant. So I'm going to repeat a couple of those, the last two examples, right? Instead of explicar, explicar. Instead of texto, texto. Okay? Some speakers pronounce it more like an S. In the word Mexico, you see an X, but that X is pronounced like the H in hat or ham. Okay, so Mexico, and again in Spain or other parts in Latin American dialects as well, you might have a little bit more friction, right? Instead of Mexico, you might hear Mexico, okay, something like that. Mexico. And finally, Z. When Z occurs in Spanish spellings, it always represents the S sound in Latin American dialects. Okay, so Z in Latin American speech is always equivalent to S, regardless of what comes after it. Zapato, zorro, plaza, corazón, lápiz, capaz. Okay? However, in most of Spain, the letter Z has a pronunciation similar to the TH in thigh. So I'm going to repeat a couple of those words as if I were in Spain. Corazón, lápiz, plaza. Okay? And I think that concludes our three-part segment on the pronunciation of consonant letters in Spanish. Again, I encourage you to go back to the video on vowel pronunciation and then to repeat all the examples in these 4 videos, vowels, and the 3-part series on consonants, until you've mastered those sounds and sort of understand the rules why certain letters have more than one sound in different positions. All right? But hopefully this series is useful. It can improve your pronunciation. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave comments, and I'll be happy to respond to those. All right, this has been Professor Jason. Thank you for watching. Hasta luego. Ciao.